For over a century, New York has been shaped by silent power brokers hidden behind legitimate businesses and polished reputations. From butchers who built secret empires to financial masterminds who controlled construction and politics, the city's influence has always been more complex than it appears. But today, there is one unseen figure, the architect, whose reach surpasses them all. Stay until the end to uncover how one person quietly owns New York without ever being seen. Joseph "Joe the Butcher" Messina, the butcher who built a billion-dollar empire. In the bustling heart of early 20th century New York, Joseph "Joe the Butcher" Messina appeared to be nothing more than a hard-working shop owner. His family butcher shop was famous for its premium cuts of meat, the kind that attracted politicians, union bosses, and neighborhood families alike. But behind the clean counters and the scent of fresh produce, Messina quietly built a network that stretched far beyond his humble storefront. Messina understood something few others did. Legitimacy could be the perfect camouflage. His business became a trusted neighborhood hub, but its backrooms told a different story. There, money changed hands for exclusive delivery services that reached into nightlife venues, exclusive private venues, and private clubs across the city. By the 1940s, the simple butcher shop had grown into a chain of delis and meat distributors valued at over $50 million, all while discreetly supporting a much larger operation hidden in plain sight. To keep appearances spotless, Messina reinvested profits into legitimate ventures, commercial kitchens, refrigerated trucking companies, and even high-ended restaurants in Manhattan. Luxury brands like Cartier and Rolex became his personal indulgences, worn only on rare occasions when he met influential figures at lavish private dinners. Through these carefully curated connections, Messina secured relationships with city officials and financial backers, making his empire feel untouchable. What made Messina truly dangerous wasn't aggression, but intelligence. He never drew attention to himself, never courted the press. While others flaunted their wealth with mansions and luxury cars, Joe quietly acquired valuable properties across Brooklyn and Manhattan, some now worth hundreds of millions of dollars. His approach pioneered a new model of influence, one that blended legal businesses with hidden networks. It became the blueprint for how organized networks would operate in the decades to come, not through overt power plays, but through ownership, discretion, and alliances. Joe the Butcher proved that the most effective way to control a city was not with fear, but with silence. And by the time anyone realized how deep his influence ran, he already owned the foundation of New York's future. Comment "Hidden Empire" if you believe true power is built quietly, right in front of everyone's eyes. Vincent Gigante, the madman who outsmarted the FBI. In the heart of Manhattan, Vincent Gigante became a living riddle. While other figures in New York's underworld flaunted expensive suits and polished cars, Gigante wandered the streets in worn pajamas and slippers, mumbling to himself and appearing completely detached from reality. To the casual observer, he looked like a harmless eccentric, but behind this carefully crafted mask of confusion was one of the most calculating minds the city had ever seen. Gigante's brilliance lay in weaponizing perception. For decades, he convinced not just the public, but also law enforcement that he was mentally unfit, avoiding court hearings and lengthy interrogations. Meanwhile, in hidden apartments and discreet social clubs, he directed a vast network that quietly influenced construction contracts, union negotiations, and high-ended nightlife establishments. Millions of dollars flowed through businesses that looked entirely legitimate, from boutique hotels to restaurant supply companies. To maintain his invisible hand, Gigante rarely appeared at public gatherings. Deals were arranged through trusted intermediaries. Financial transactions passed through shell corporations and offshore accounts. With investments in prime New York real estate, properties now valued at over $200 million collectively. While his rivals craved media attention, Gigante quietly secured control over the most profitable industries, ensuring his network remained both wealthy and undetectable. Even his personal lifestyle reflected his careful strategy. He avoided luxury mansions or exotic cars that drew attention. Instead, he lived modestly in a Greenwich Village townhouse, while discreetly channeling funds into properties registered under relatives' names. Jewelry from Cartier and watches from Rolex appeared only when necessary to impress key political or business contacts. Gigante's act of feigned insanity became one of the most sophisticated defenses ever employed. It allowed him to extend his influence for years without facing the intense scrutiny that brought down more flamboyant figures. By the time federal investigations pieced together the truth, his control had already reshaped how organized power operated in New York. Vincent Gigante proved that in a city where reputation could be a weapon, the greatest shield was invisibility. His story redefined what it meant to rule, not by intimidation, but by deception so deep it blurred the line between reality and performance. Michele Big Mike Miranda, from streets to corporate towers. Michele Big Mike Miranda was not the kind of man you'd find lingering in smoky back rooms or making loud public statements. Unlike his predecessors who ruled through fear and visibility, Miranda believed true power was built quietly, in contracts, boardrooms, and the fine print of city projects. His rise marked the beginning of a new era where organized influence moved beyond the streets and into corporate towers. Miranda understood early on that New York's skyline itself could be controlled. While others focused on small businesses, he targeted the city's booming construction and real estate industries. Through layers of shell companies, unions, and seemingly legitimate investment firms, he secured control over high-value contracts for skyscrapers, luxury hotels, and residential complexes. By the 1970s, it's estimated that his network funneled over $500 million through construction deals alone, blending illicit gains with legitimate urban development. His strategy was simple yet brilliant: infiltrate the unions that supplied labor for the city's biggest projects. This gave him the power to dictate which developers could build and at what cost. Real estate moguls and construction magnates had little choice but to work through Miranda's network if they wanted their projects to move forward without delays. Unlike the traditional figures who flaunted their wealth, Miranda's style was understated. He preferred tailored Armani suits, discreet meetings at upscale venues like the Plaza Hotel, and investments in high-end office spaces along Fifth Avenue. While his rivals were spending fortunes on lavish homes in the Hamptons, Miranda quietly acquired commercial buildings in Midtown Manhattan, properties now valued at hundreds of millions of dollars. Even his financial network was meticulously planned. Offshore trusts, layered corporate structures, and silent partnerships with influential developers made his operations nearly invisible to regulators. By the time anyone suspected a deeper connection, the paper trail led to clean, legitimate businesses with polished reputations. Miranda's approach transformed the entire landscape of organized influence. He showed that brute force was outdated. The real power was in paperwork, negotiations, and alliances with key city players. By embedding himself in the very fabric of New York's economic engine, Michele Big Mike, Miranda proved that the future of control wasn't on the streets. It was hidden behind the glass towers he helped build. Carmine Persico Jr., the man who ruled from a prison cell. Carmine Persico Jr. was known as the Snake, a man who could glide through any situation with calculated precision. Unlike many of his contemporaries who lost control once behind bars, Persico managed to turn prison into his command center. From solitary confinement, he orchestrated decisions that shaped New York's economic and political landscape, proving that influence doesn't require freedom, it only requires loyalty and a network that runs deeper than steel walls. His primary leverage came from absolute control over key industries. Through trusted associates, Persico maintained authority over waterfront operations, shipping contracts, and critical labor unions. These unions dictated who could work on the docks, how goods moved through the city, and ultimately who profited. Even from inside a cell, his network generated tens of millions of dollars annually, flowing through layers of companies that looked entirely legitimate. The sophistication of Persico's system was remarkable. He had legal teams and business advisors meeting with him under the guise of ordinary visits, passing coded information to his loyalists on the outside. His people handled high-value contracts for construction projects, urban redevelopment, and even luxury real estate across Brooklyn and Manhattan. Some of these properties, once quietly controlled by Persico's network, are now valued at hundreds of millions of dollars, hidden behind corporate names and trusts. While he personally lived a restrained life behind bars, his external network was meticulous about appearances. Meetings were held in upscale Manhattan restaurants. Luxury cars like Mercedes-Benz S-Class were used for discreet transportation, and conversations were drowned out with ambient noise from private dining rooms. Every move was designed to keep the operation seamless, with no sign that a man in solitary confinement was still pulling strings. Persico's reign revealed a deeper truth about New York's underworld. Real power wasn't just about who walked the streets, it was about who could command from anywhere. He turned prison into an office, proving that influence is measured not by proximity, but by reach. Comment "power without walls" if you believe true control cannot be confined by bars. Frank Costello, the Prime Minister of the Mafia. Frank Costello was unlike any figure who came before him. While his predecessors relied on intimidation and visible displays of power, Costello chose a quieter, more refined path. He understood that true influence wasn't about who shouted the loudest or commanded the most men. It was about who controlled the institutions that shaped the city. Costello cultivated relationships in the highest circles of New York society. He attended private dinners at the Waldorf Astoria, played golf with influential politicians, and quietly contributed to campaigns that ensured loyalty from city officials. It's estimated that during his reign, he discreetly moved millions of dollars annually into the hands of decision-makers, securing long-term protection for his operations. His reach extended far beyond street corners and local businesses. Through trusted intermediaries, Costello influenced judicial appointments, ensuring that legal challenges rarely gained traction. Police departments and key city offices often looked the other way, not through threats, but through carefully negotiated agreements. His network even touched high-end real estate, with properties quietly purchased through corporate fronts. Buildings that today would be worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Unlike others who flaunted their wealth with luxury cars and sprawling estates, Costello's displays were subtle yet calculated. His wardrobe was tailored by Brioni, his watches came from Patek Philippe, and his preferred drink was top-shelf scotch served in private lounges. Every detail of his appearance was designed to signal sophistication, not excess. He wanted to blend seamlessly with New York's elite, to appear as a businessman rather than a figure of fear. This strategic image earned him the title of the Prime Minister. Costello didn't need to be the most feared man in the city, he was the most connected. His influence shaped city projects, labor unions, and even entertainment venues, all without drawing unnecessary attention. Frank Costello's approach transformed the entire perception of organized influence in New York. He proved that the ultimate power wasn't in force, but in subtlety, guiding institutions from within rather than challenging them from outside. His reign became a blueprint for a new era of control, one where influence felt invisible, yet was woven into the city's very fabric. Anelo della Croce, holy men with dirty money. Anelo della Croce mastered a strategy so subtle that most never saw it coming. While others hid their operations in nightclubs or union offices, Della Croce chose a sanctuary few would ever suspect, places of worship and charitable institutions. His genius was in understanding society's blind spots. People questioned a nightclub owner, but who would question a respected donor at a community church? Della Croce quietly built a network of religious non-profits, community outreach programs, and charitable foundations. These organizations appeared pristine on the surface, hosting food drives, supporting after-school initiatives, and even funding scholarship programs. Yet behind the public image of generosity, they were carefully designed financial channels. Through these non-profits, Della Croce moved hundreds of millions of dollars from hidden, exclusive private venues and quiet cash businesses into seemingly legitimate accounts, washing away any trace of origin. His reach extended into construction projects tied to these non-profits. He helped fund the restoration of community buildings, often choosing prime urban properties that later increased in value exponentially. Some of these assets, bought decades ago under non-profit trusts, are now worth tens of millions of dollars, quietly generating income without drawing attention. To maintain the illusion, Della Croce positioned himself as a benefactor, appearing at public charity events in well-tailored canali suits and discreetly wearing luxury timepieces from Rolex, signaling refinement rather than excess. His influence over community leaders, local clergy, and even small business owners created a protective shield. Donations from these networks were reported as benevolent contributions, making any scrutiny seem disrespectful to the very communities they were supporting. What made Delacroce's approach so effective was its duality. To the public, he was a man of quiet faith and philanthropy. To those in the know, he was a strategist who turned moral institutions into financial fortresses. Even when law enforcement looked into his operations, the trail led back to churches and charities, places that naturally discouraged deeper investigation. By embedding his financial networks into respected institutions, Delacroce blurred the lines between community service and personal gain. He demonstrated that control doesn't always need force or fear. Sometimes it thrives best when wrapped in trust and respect. His story revealed an evolution in influence, where the safest place to hide was in plain sight, behind doors society was least likely to question. John Goty, from the Teflon Don to a federal target. John Goty was a figure who redefined the public image of organized power in New York. Unlike his predecessors, who preferred quiet influence, Goty embraced the spotlight with unapologetic confidence. He became known as the Teflon Don because no charges seemed to stick to him. Dressed in immaculate Brioni suits and adorned with diamond-studded Rolex watches, he cultivated an image of sophistication that captivated both the media and the streets. Goty understood the value of appearance in shaping perception. He arrived at social clubs in chauffeured Mercedes BBS-class sedans, exuding an aura of untouchable authority. For years, this strategy worked. Despite federal investigations and multiple indictments, Goty's legal team, funded by an estimated $10 million, managed to dismantle case after case. Courtrooms turned into theaters where he walked out smiling, reinforcing the myth that he was beyond reach. But Goty's charisma came at a cost. His willingness to engage with the media brought unprecedented attention. Tabloids followed his every move, splashing headlines about his expensive tailored wardrobe and evenings at upscale Manhattan restaurants like the Rainbow Room. Unlike the silent corporate-style bosses who hid in shadows, Goty relished the fame, inadvertently drawing scrutiny from federal agencies determined to bring him down. Behind the scenes, his network still controlled lucrative industries, construction contracts, waste management, and labor unions, moving millions of dollars annually. Yet the public image he curated became his downfall. Surveillance intensified, informants grew bolder, and eventually, the evidence overwhelmed the myth. His conviction marked more than the end of Goty's reign. It symbolized the collapse of the old-school visible mob era. After Goty, the remaining power players in New York learned an important lesson. Survival depended on invisibility. Flashy suits and media stunts could build a legend, but they also built a target. John Goty's story remains a cautionary tale of influence and exposure. He showed how charisma could elevate a man from the shadows to near celebrity status, but also how the same attention that made him iconic ultimately dismantled the empire he tried to protect. The architect, the ghost who owns New York today. Today, the power in New York no longer belongs to loud, flashy figures. It belongs to someone who can't be seen. Known only as the architect, this figure represents the evolution of influence. There are no photos, no interviews, no public appearances, yet every major deal in the city, from billion-dollar real estate projects to quiet financial transactions, seems to pass through his unseen network. Through layers of offshore trusts, cryptocurrency portfolios, and shell companies, the architect controls entire blocks of Manhattan, luxury hotels worth over $300 million, exclusive nightclubs in Soho, and even high-rise developments along Fifth Avenue are quietly tied to his name through a maze of corporate fronts. His reach stretches into unions that dictate who builds the city's skyline and which contracts get approved, making him a silent gatekeeper of New York's future. Unlike the past bosses who relied on fear, the architect uses alliances and ownership. He keeps peace between rival networks, maintains influence over political figures, and even shapes decisions within city agencies, all without leaving a trail. He wears no signature suits, drives no recognizable luxury cars, and yet his presence is everywhere, shaping the city's economy like an invisible hand. Behind his network are investments in digital currencies, discreet partnerships with major hedge funds, and hidden stakes in luxury brands like Louis Vuitton and Cartier boutiques scattered across Manhattan. Even cultural spaces, art galleries, theaters, and exclusive auction houses quietly generate income for his empire, blending into the city's legitimate business world. This is the new face of dominance, quiet, embedded, and impossible to trace. The architect proves that the greatest power doesn't roar, it whispers, hidden in contracts, alliances, and the fine print of deals no one questions. Comment Invisible Empire if you believe the most powerful person is the one you never see. From Joseph Joe the Butcher, Messina's hidden fortune, to Frank Costello's quiet control over politics, New York's story has always been one of influence disguised as legitimacy. And now the architect represents the ultimate evolution of that power, a figure who no longer relies on fear, but on financial networks, real estate, and silent alliances that shape the city from within. It's a new kind of empire, one built on strategy and invisibility rather than headlines. If you found this journey into New York's hidden power intriguing, like this video and subscribe to Billionaire Story for more untold stories of influence and wealth.